Hello, I'm Alex from Best Recaps, and I'd love to tell you a story. Noah is reincarnated as a noble one day, but there's a major problem. Just take a look at that status screen, it's shamefully low, just straight up embarrassing for someone in his position. The kid was born as the 13th prince of the imperial royal family, and the emperor is quite interested in seeing his new baby boy. During the presentation, the sovereign is informed that the boy's highest magic affinity is with the water element, so as a first birthday present, he decides to give his son a fief located near the sea. As soon as those words leave the emperor's mouth, something crazy happens, and Noah notices a change appearing right next to his water magic, which until then was only E rank. When his father asks to see the baby's status screen, our protagonist gets worried, thinking that with such low grades he'd be discarded like trash. But what happens is a true miracle. The moment the status is displayed to everyone, Noah's water magic jumped from E rank to an absurd double SS rank. The rest of his skills remain a solid F rank, but honestly, who cares about that when a baby shows the highest level of water magic anyone has ever seen? This is a clear sign that he will be a genius in the future, which makes the emperor start to really like little Noah. I have to confess that I'm already loving how this system works, because the reason for this SS rank is precisely the fief he gained from his father, although on his personal screen, the skill appears as E plus S. Another bizarre detail is that the other stat increases came from his maids, and he still hasn't quite understood why, but it seems that the more servants he has, the stronger he becomes. His level is still 1, but since it can be increased infinitely, it's obvious the kid is going to become completely overpowered in the future, even though for now he is still quite weak. While he eats his breakfast, one of his maids named Evelyn appears to warn him that his brothers, specifically the 1st and 4th princes, have come to visit him. Normally receiving family would be nice, but in the last 6 years of life, Noah has learned that those two are complete idiots, so he needs to be very careful when dealing with them. He heads to the lounge area, and after formal greetings, the 1st prince, Albert, announces that he brought a gift. He orders his servant to bring the object, and the moment Noah sets eyes on the sword, it's clear that the thing is completely cursed. You can literally see the tormented souls of the dead hovering around the weapon, and it's obvious that Albert knows the sword is haunted, but he pretends it's a normal gift. Since you can't refuse a gesture from the crown prince, Noah is forced to accept, even though he knows this has everything to go wrong. He holds the hilt and lifts the weapon while Albert explains, as if it were nothing, that this is a water magic sword and that over 120 knights have already died trying to use it. The boy even loosens his grip in shock, but the 4th prince, Henry, tells him not to worry, because everyone who wasn't worthy died the exact moment they touched the sword, so if the curse were going to get him, he'd already be dead. The reason for this immunity is likely his double SS rank water attribute, and it's even comforting to know he won't kick the bucket because of the object. But Noah is furious that Albert risked his life just for a dumb experiment. He keeps the anger to himself and waits for his brother to leave to get some peace. Later, while walking through the halls with his maid Zoe, he notices she looks very sad and decides to ask what's up. Zoe tries to deflect so as not to bother her master, but Noah insists and orders her to tell the truth immediately. She finally gives in and explains that she needs time off to deal with family problems, telling him that her hometown suffered from a flood that destroyed her mother's farm, leaving them without a livelihood. Zoe was desperate for money, and the only solution they gave her was to work in the red light district for a while, which was exactly what she planned to do. But our protagonist doesn't accept this at all. He decides to give her mother a job, inventing the position of professional rear gate closer on the spot, and offers a salary of 10 rin per month. Zoe is shocked because this amount is much higher than normal, and she has never heard of this job, but Noah doesn't care. After all, it's his money, and he wants to help. He even offers an old house on the outskirts of town so they don't have to pay rent, as he would never let a faithful servant sell her body because of a tragedy. But Noah's plan doesn't stop there. He calls his butler, Dylan, and orders him to organize the purchase of all the lands damaged by the flood. Both Dylan and Zoe are speechless, but the prince explains that scammers would surely try to deceive people who lost everything, and he wants to ensure their safety before that happens. Dylan is at a loss for words, seeing how a 6-year-old child can predict things so far ahead, but Noah can't tell him that he has already lived a whole life before this one. The butler agrees to help, but warns that the estimated cost for this would be 700,000 rin, an absurd amount considering that a common adult earns only 120 rin per year. Noah has only 500,000 rin saved and needs another 200,000 urgently. Without many options, he decides to sell the fief he owns, but Dylan warns him that this would be a crime against the imperial family since the land was a gift from the emperor. Even aware of the risk, the boy decides to move forward and accept any punishment that comes from his father. The next day, while preparing for the trip, the fourth prince, Henry, appears by surprise. Unlike Albert, Henry is a cool guy and came to warn him that the sword Noah won has a will of its own and that he will need to earn its recognition to use it safely. Noah thanks him for the advice and leaves for the village of Dasso. He notices that many residents lost their documents in the disaster and sends Dylan to get copies at the government office to speed up the purchases. Meanwhile, the prince decides to see the people up close, and despite Zoe's protests, he heads into the middle of the village. The situation is terrible. The crops were destroyed and there will be no harvest this year, which means the residents will have no way to survive. At that moment, a bell rings and everyone gathers in the main square. Zoe thinks it's for the distribution of food coming from the Empire's relief funds, which Noah thinks is great, but as soon as he tastes the meal, he takes back everything he said. One of the residents, not knowing that Noah is a prince, comments that the food is always horrible like this and that no one does anything. Shortly after, the local government official, Lord Garrel, arrives to inspect the food. Garrel looks at that mysterious stew and thinks it's absolute garbage, but since he's not the one who's going to eat it, he doesn't give a damn and even asks the chef to prepare something decent at his mansion. Noah can't stand seeing this kind of behavior and confronts the official, asking if he is serving that spoiled food to steal the rest of the budget for himself. Thinking Noah is just some random peasant, Garrel openly admits he is embezzling the money because he thinks no one can stop him. Hearing the guy brag about stealing from starving people makes Noah's blood boil so much that the cursed sword starts to react. Garrel gets irritated with the child's disrespect, pulls his sword and prepares to kill him, but before he can do anything, Leviathan flies out of the scabbard and into Noah's hands. The boy's strong sense of justice was enough for the sword to recognize him as a worthy master, and with the weapon's power, he cuts off Garrel's head without the slightest effort, punishing him for the embezzlement and for threatening a royal prince. Shortly after, Garrel's boss, Lord Rowan, appears, and the guards try to have Noah arrested, but Rowan recognizes the 13th prince immediately and kneels in respect. Noah warns that they need to have a serious talk about the situation of the village, making it clear that Rowan is in hot water for having allowed Garrel to do whatever he wanted. The prince orders that the accomplices be punished and that a real meal be prepared for the people. Later, while Noah finishes buying the village, Albert receives the report about his brother using the sword without suffering damage and already begins to plot new plans. Meanwhile, Noah is called by the emperor to explain himself. He was already expecting a huge scolding for selling his lands to buy a destroyed village, but to his surprise, the emperor thanks him, because if Noah hadn't acted, the suffering of those people would have been much worse. The emperor clearly realizes that little Noah is an extremely capable young man and asks him to continue serving the empire with all his strength, something our protagonist accepts with a smile on his face. A little while later, we see the boy visiting the famous city of mirrors, and he's not there for a vacation, but because he heard there's an incredibly talented singer performing there. As soon as the show begins, the prince is completely hypnotized by the girl's angelic voice and is enjoying every second of the performance. But out of nowhere, the vibe is cut when a group of thugs invades the theater and starts yelling at the singer. From what it seems, the girl's father owes a fortune to these guys, and she is there working her heart out to pay off the debt. Only the thugs think she will never earn enough and start threatening her, saying she should go work in the red light district. Everyone in the theater sees the cowardice happening, but they are all too scared and no one has the courage to intervene, so our prodigy decides it's time to step in before the worst happens. He calmly walks to the stage and starts quoting the laws of the Imperial Constitution that specifically prohibit children from being forced to pay their parents' debts, making it clear that what they are doing is totally illegal. The brutes tell the kid to mind his own business and threaten to teach him a lesson if he doesn't beat it, but the little prince simply summons his sword and fires some warning shots that make the guys realize they aren't dealing with just anyone. Now that they saw the situation is much more serious, the criminals retreat, but they still leave yelling that he will pay dearly the next time they meet. With the thugs away from there, the boy asks his maid to hand a business card to the theater owner, warning that if those guys come back, he should say that the singer is under royal protection. The owner of the place looks at the card and almost falls over, realizing he is standing before the 13th prince. Our protagonist then turns to the girl and asks how much she spends per month to live, and although she hesitates a bit because of the expenses with her sick mother, he announces that he will pay 25 ron monthly to her. The idea is for her to focus only on music without worrying about money or having to return the amount, but for now, he only asks her to finish the performance that was interrupted. Upon returning home, the little genius is received by his housekeeper, but he finds it strange to see a crowd of people bowing outside the gates, and I confess I would be confused too. The maid explains that those people are loan sharks who came to ask for forgiveness for what they did since they didn't know his identity, but the prince sends them all away, stating that not just anyone can talk to him whenever they feel like it. At that moment, Brother Henry appears and, having heard everything, praises the younger one's choice, commenting that giving an audience to this type of people would stain the royal family's reputation. The boy agrees that keeping up appearances is important, but reveals that the real reason for ignoring the subjects is different. Since he wants to support the singer, he felt that if he left the loan sharks thinking he is still furious, they would be afraid to get near the girl again. Henry is impressed with his brother's maturity, thinking it's incredible how he can think so far ahead, something that other princes of the same age, like Frank and Gary, would never be capable of. Anyway, the reason for the visit is to talk about the magic weapon, and our protagonist takes the opportunity to thank him for the previous warning about the sword having a will of its own, which was essential for him. The brother is happy to help, but is puzzled about how a child of that size can carry such a giant and clunky sword everywhere, but the boy shows that it's no problem at all. Henry goes into shock seeing the sword appear out of nowhere, and the little master explains that he is just shrinking the size of the weapon to hide it inside his sleeve. Leviathan has been a national treasure for centuries, and no one has ever come close to doing anything like that, which only proves the absurd natural talent the boy possesses. Later, the prince accompanies his brother to the gate and notices that the thugs from before are still there begging for forgiveness, but he doesn't even give them a look. One of the loan sharks loses his patience at being ignored and charges at him, threatening to kill him, but the little genius knocks him down without even needing to move. Henry asks what the heck happened, and he explains that he just released a bit of Leviathan's power to calm the guy down, demonstrating an energy control that doesn't even surprise his brother anymore. That same night, the boy decides to go to an event in the city and is received by the host, a man named Radok. As they enter the banquet hall, the man notices the sword on the young man's waist and asks about it, since the piece looks very special. The prince explains that it's a gift from his brother, the legendary Leviathan, and the whole hall falls silent upon discovering that a child carries a national treasure. Of course, there's always someone jealous, and a guy in the back starts saying out loud that the sword must just be a toy replica. Our protagonist doesn't let the disrespect slide and releases a fraction of the weapon's power to prove it's real, but he ends up being a bit heavy-handed and almost makes everyone faint with the energy pressure. When he finally stops, everyone is visibly shaken, and to lighten the mood, they start praising how incredible he is for mastering such a weapon, fearing his wrath. Actually, the boy wasn't even that angry, but the sword was, and it decided to act on its own to defend its master's honor. The host asks what should be done with the man who insulted him, and although the punishment should be severe, the prince decides to just let it go. The party continues, and several nobles approach to introduce themselves until it's the turn of Byron Allen, the head of the Allen Company, along with his daughter Cindy. With just one look, the boy deduces that the girl is adopted, which leaves Byron in shock by the precision of the analysis. The man asks how he found out, and the little prince explains that he noticed the composure of a natural-born noble in Byron, while Cindy still seems to be learning how to carry herself. Besides, he noticed the look of someone who was once a slave on her face when he mentioned the adoption. Byron apologizes for not telling him sooner and clarifies that he really bought the girl as a slave, but because she is very intelligent, he decided to raise her as a daughter so she could inherit his business one day. He thought a noble would hate the idea, but on the contrary, our protagonist totally approves of the decision and invites both of them to visit his mansion whenever they want. The next day, the boy goes to the market and finds his eighth brother, Prince Oscar, who invites him to a treasure hunt on Cobalt Street. The place is famous for having many artifacts, but it's also full of fakes, which makes the search very difficult. They spend the afternoon looking, and Oscar is already ready to give up when a book catches our little master's eye. He buys the work for only 3 Rien, and the older brother almost falls backward, realizing it is the grimoire of the legendary sorceress Andrea, an item worth thousands of Rien that the shopkeeper just lost without even knowing. Oscar asks how he knew, but the truth is that the boy only bought it because he felt his status increase upon touching the book. Thinking that the item must have a consciousness of its own, just like his sword, he points Leviathan at the grimoire, and black energy starts coming out of it along with a malevolent spirit. Oscar realizes that the sorceress's soul was sealed there, and that now she will attack everything she sees ahead. He tells his younger brother to move away, but the boy already knows what to do. He lifts his sword and lets out a water slash with full strength, destroying the spirit instantly. The brother is relieved but concerned about potential casualties, but the little genius guarantees that he aimed the explosion at the sky. Oscar is marveled, not only by the quick decision-making, but by the fact that he defeated a legendary spirit with just one blow. At that, a local shopkeeper named Alan approaches and makes a proposal, saying he has an artifact that no one can use, but that maybe the prince can awaken it. They follow the man to the shop and are presented with a special ring that, according to rumors, only works with someone worthy. It seems like a scam, but the boy decides to test it, and to everyone's surprise, the ring reacts and forms a powerful armor around him. The prince decides to keep the item because of its defensive skills, and already puts the ring to the test on the way back, when the loan shark from before tries a revenge attack. The ring creates an automatic shield, the guy is thrown to the ground, and the problem is solved. Later, our protagonist goes to another performance of the singer and is certain that after the attack on the noble, that loan shark is finished and won't be a nuisance anymore. Only the problems don't stop, as 2 drunks invade the stage to hit on the girl after the show. The boy intervenes and kicks the subjects out, but he is already tired of so much trouble and asks the owner to stop accepting that type of customer. The man says the business doesn't survive without them, so the prince simply offers a giant bag of coins and buys the entire establishment. The singer approaches emotionally to thank him and asks how she can repay him, but all the boy wants is to hear her sing once more. One fine morning, Noah is preparing to start his day when he receives news that Marley, the general of Holjoy, is there to visit him. Holjoy is one of the most promising lands within our protagonist's fief, so he accepts the meeting and asks the maids to bring the guest inside. Marley greets him in the meeting room, but the little prince waives the formalities and asks him to sit down. The two met about 1.5 years ago when Marley was appointed general, and taking advantage of the reunion, Noah asks how things are going. He recalls that the official received imperial orders to manage flood control in the area, but by the man's face, he can tell the situation is not good at all. Holjoy is a very rich agricultural land located on the curve of a river, which makes it an easy target for floods, and that's why the emperor had ordered funds to be sent for relief in the region. Marley explains that he hasn't been able to make any real change, and the reason is irritating. The finance minister keeps making up excuses not to release the necessary money. Noah is extremely dissatisfied hearing this, as it smells like blatant embezzlement of national funds, so he orders the general to accompany him, as the two are going to pay a little visit to said minister. Shortly after, the boy interrupts the finance minister's lunch, and the subject is exactly as he imagined: fat and greasy. The official tries to flatter the prince, but our protagonist goes straight to the point and questions why Holjoy's budget is being held back. The minister tries to keep his cool and says he has a good reason, but Noah cuts him off right away, warning that he better not underestimate him for being a child. After all, belittling a prince is an executable crime. The man starts to get nervous and releases a flimsy excuse, saying that since the emperor gave Holjoy tax exemptions last year, he thought it fair that the village use that saved money to pay for this year's works. I confess that this is the biggest nonsense Noah has heard in 6 years of life, and he asks if the minister thinks he looks like a fool. It's obvious the exemption came precisely because the village didn't have a cent to pay taxes, so saying they still have that money is an insult to anyone's intelligence. Realizing he's in deep trouble, the minister appeals to the emperor's name, saying he needs the money to build a royal villa for the sovereign, since he is getting old. Noah notices the fatal error and warns that the official just committed a very serious crime, because besides calling the emperor old, he used his name to cover up a corruption scheme. The minister panics and starts begging for forgiveness, but the boy makes it clear. Either he releases the funds now, or the emperor will find out the whole story. With no way out, the subject runs to obey, and Marley thanks him immensely for the help, although he feels bad for involving the prince in such a mess. As soon as he prepares to return home, Noah receives an urgent call from his father and rushes to the castle. The emperor receives him without formalities and congratulates him on the way he dealt with the finance minister. The boy is surprised by the speed of the news, but the father explains that information is the strongest weapon there is and that his spy network is impeccable. The sovereign is impressed with the 6-year-old son's maturity and with the fact that he has already mastered the sword Leviathan, which is a dark and dangerous weapon. Noah knows well what his father is talking about, as the sword almost killed everyone at that party if he hadn't controlled it. Since the little genius hasn't had formal fencing lessons yet, the emperor introduces Damien Noble, the empire's greatest swordsman, to be his instructor. Damien challenges the pupil to a friendly duel to test his potential, and Noah accepts, charging at the master. During the combat, the boy feels the memories and skills of the previous users of Leviathan flowing into his body, making his movements sharper and sharper. The two lock swords, and when Damien thinks he has the advantage, the prince makes an upward movement and disarms the greatest warrior in the kingdom, leaving both the instructor and the emperor speechless. Since the boy already possesses the skills of a master, there is nothing more Damien can teach. Proud, the emperor appoints Noah as the chief judge of this year's knight selection exam, which is a huge honor. This exam attracts warriors from all over the world, and the winner becomes a direct subordinate of the chief judge. And since Noah gains status when he gets talented servants, he is quite excited. The boy decides to change the rules. He cancels the regional qualifiers and brings the entire tournament to the capital to ensure that no strong candidate is excluded by local schemes or injustices. At home, he talks to Zoe about her village and discovers they usually send only one representative because of high travel and lodging costs. To solve this, the little prince announces he will cover all travel and housing expenses for all candidates this year. Since he doesn't just want to burn money, he decides to buy empty buildings in the area and build a lodging that will have value even after the tournament. To take care of the food, he calls Byron Allen and asks for a quote. The merchant presents an absurdly low value, almost no profit, and Noah soon realizes there is something behind it, as he knows a merchant gives nothing for free. Byron admits he wants a favor in return, that the prince use his influence to hire one of his servants to work at the castle, serving as an informant for the company's business. The boy agrees, and Byron swears exclusive loyalty to him within the royal family. Upon gaining Byron's loyalty, Noah's stats go up, but he notices his water magic level has dropped a rank. Since this power comes from his lands, he notices something is wrong in Almeria and rushes to warn his father. He says he noticed strange signs, and the emperor confirms that a rebellion has broken out there. The sovereign offers the mission to solve the problem to Noah, but the boy refuses and suggests that brother Henry go in his place, as he has more experience. Later, while traveling together in a carriage, Henry asks why the younger one gave up the glory of battle. The little prince explains that he doesn't want to risk the lives of his soldiers in a war he doesn't yet master. Suddenly, Leviathan warns of hostile intent ahead, and Noah orders the driver to stop. He realizes they are rebels trying to assassinate him and runs away from the carriage to protect Henry. 4 water jets sprout from the ground trying to get him, but the boy defends himself with his shield and faces the attackers. The rebels try to surround him. Only the prince's skill is superior, and he defeats everyone in a matter of seconds. Henry is stunned by the ease of the victory, and laments not being able to interrogate them, but the little genius reveals he only knocked them out and they are ready to talk. Noah then shares a masterstroke. The Almerian rebels use a lot of cavalry, but the region doesn't have horse farms, which means the supplies come from outside. He orders Byron to buy the entire stock of horse feed from neighboring regions, so the rebels' animals will go hungry and become weak, making Henry's work much easier when it's time to crush the revolt. The next day, our protagonist Noah kneels before the emperor for another important conversation. The sovereign explains that the rebels from the other day were actually trying to kidnap the boy to use him as a bargaining chip in their negotiations. Noah takes a moment to reflect on this and comes to the conclusion that if the rebels admitted to something like that so easily, they must be lying about at least part of the story. The emperor admits that his son is absolutely right, but he tells him not to worry about it. He explains that he has very effective ways to confirm if someone is telling the truth, and by that method, he definitely means torture. Our little master doesn't know much about such a heavy subject like interrogation, so he decides to just take his father's word for it and doesn't question it any further. Putting that aside, the emperor starts praising Noah for coming up with the brilliant idea of buying all the rebels' horse feed, which served to completely paralyze their movement and transportation. When the kid hears this, he is in total shock. He had barely made that decision and he's already wondering how his father found out so fast. I have to admit that this emperor's spy network is on a whole other level. The sovereign steps closer, gives the boy a pat on the shoulder, and says that both his brilliant ideas and his speed in taking action are clear signs of a great leader. Noah thanks him for the compliment, feeling a little embarrassed and even blushing slightly at the situation. The emperor then decides he wants to reward him for his actions, and after stroking his beard and thinking carefully, he chooses to add a sword to Noah's crest. The young prince looks up in amazement because he knows this is one of the highest honors anyone can receive. Normally, it would be considered sacrilege, and even punishable by death, to add a sword to a crest without royal permission. But since the order came directly from the emperor, it becomes a public recognition that the boy is special. Feeling deeply honored, Noah thanks him with the utmost respect and gratitude. Later on, he meets with Byron to get a report on the horse feed plan. After a quick update, Byron mentions a man named Carfun, who is the leader of the rebels. The merchant explains that Carfun is an extremely persistent guy who will do anything to achieve his goals. Byron says he believes the villain is nothing the prince can't handle, but he still asks him to be careful. The boy is intrigued by why Byron is telling him this, sensing there might be something more behind that warning. Right at that moment, one of the maids walks in and announces that there's a wounded man at the main gate claiming to have an urgent report. Noah rushes down there and sees an army soldier kneeling in terrible physical condition. The man announces that there has been a rebellion in Almeria started by his own superiors and explains that he refused to participate in the uprising, risking his life to bring the news firsthand. Byron hears everything and quickly realizes the information isn't that useful since the prince already knew about the revolt. Even so, Noah thanks the soldier for the effort, sends a maid to take him in for treatment, and even gifts him 1,000 Ryan for his loyalty before calmly walking away. Byron follows him and asks what the point was in giving such a high reward for information they already had. The kid admits that the report was useless, but explains that the fact a simple soldier risked everything to come talk directly to him demonstrates true loyalty. And for our protagonist, that kind of faithfulness deserves to be recognized. Byron is left thoughtful, starting to understand how the little master's leadership mind works. At night, while working in his office, Zoe walks in looking nervous. She says that a strange man offered her 500 Rian to make the prince drink what looked like a sleeping drug. Noah figures out instantly that this is the rebels' plan to kidnap him while he sleeps, and is surprised by how bold they are being. He asks why Zoe decided to tell the truth instead of keeping the money, and she explains that she would never dream of betraying him, especially after everything he did for her mother. Hearing this, the boy goes back to his desk and writes a check for 5,000 Rian for her. Since she didn't sell him out for 500, he added an extra 0 as a prize for her loyalty. Zoe tries to refuse, saying it's too much money, but the prince insists and she ends up accepting, crying with emotion and calling him a generous master. Right after that, the kid reveals he wants her to do one more thing and explains his risky plan. He says he's going to drink the drug on purpose so the rebels take him, and orders that, as soon as they leave, she must flee and hide as fast as possible so she isn't killed. Zoe thinks the idea is way too dangerous, but she ends up accepting. The plan is executed, and later on, Noah wakes up in the back of a wagon with his hands and feet tied. Luckily, he had hidden the Leviathan and was still wearing his magic ring, which he uses to cut the ropes. The boy then asks the sword to show the memories of what happened while he was out and sees exactly how the bandits invaded the mansion. Now, knowing everything, he decides it's time to attack. The rebels notice he's standing up, but they don't even worry, thinking he's just a helpless child. But then Noah pulls out the Leviathan and kills one of them on the spot, leaving the others paralyzed with shock. They try to attack together to use the numerical advantage, but our protagonist defeats every single one of them without any difficulty. Shortly after, Zoe shows up with a search party and the boy gives her a scolding for risking herself when he told her to hide. She lowers her head and says she was too worried to stay still. Seeing the girl's sincerity, he forgives her and asks her not to be so reckless again. While the soldiers collect the bodies, one of them tries to pick up a dagger from the ground, but Noah yells for him to stop. He orders everyone to back away and observes the dagger carefully, sensing a massive amount of malicious energy. The prince realizes the weapon is cursed with the hatred of whoever used it last and deduces it belongs to the leader of the rebels. Using the Leviathan, he focuses on that energy signature and fires a long-range attack that travels for miles, crosses through outer space itself, and tracks the rebel leader's presence, killing the guy instantly. The next day, the emperor praises the incredible feat, stating that few people would be capable of something like that. With the leader dead, the rebel forces are lost and are suppressed by Prince Henry. Soon, everyone involved in the plot is arrested, and the emperor decides the traitors will be drawn and quartered. The jury and those present celebrate the severe punishment, but suddenly, Noah takes a step forward. He tells his father in a firm and respectful way that this decision is not the wisest choice, leaving everyone in shock. The boy explains that the traitors must be punished strictly according to imperial law. Whoever planned the revolt should be cut in half at the waist, and whoever just participated should be hanged. He points out that ignoring his own laws to quarter, someone would damage the empire's authority, because if the emperor doesn't follow the rules he created himself, others might question his future judgments. The sovereign listens to everything carefully and realizes his son has a very valid point. After reflecting, he changes the sentence to follow the law to the letter and thanks the kid for helping him maintain order. Everyone is marveled by Noah's calm in correcting his father in front of everyone, and the emperor, seeing such wisdom, grants him the special title of wise. At that exact moment, the kid's status on the system screen updates to Wise Prince, an unprecedented honor that makes the people start to hail him with this new nickname. After that, his father remembers that the knight selection exam is coming up and asks how his son intends to judge the candidates. The little master says he already has a plan and gives a demonstration right there. He asks the servants to throw water at him while he uses the shield of his protection ring to deflect everything. He explains that in the actual exam, participants will have to attack him this way, and he will judge the strength and control of each one by the effectiveness of the hit against his defense. The emperor thinks the idea is creative, but warns that it could be dangerous if someone manages to break the prince's defense. Noah says calmly not to worry, because he already has countermeasures prepared for any possibility. Hearing this, the sovereign praises his son's confidence and quick thinking, saying he's very lucky to have such a brilliant heir. Later that night, the emperor retires to his inner chambers along with Noiselle, the prime minister. Back in the royal chambers, the emperor orders one of the servants to bring out the true seal of the Leviathan. Legends have always said that this seal must never be broken, but seeing just how talented and extraordinary little Noah has become, the father can't help but wonder what would happen if that protection were breached, and what kind of power or change it would bring to the boy. I have to admit I'd be a bit scared to mess with something so dangerous, but the emperor's curiosity seems to have no limits. The day of the knight selection exam finally arrives, and commoners from even the most remote parts of the empire show up to witness the new era of warriors. This year, the crowd is significantly larger because as soon as rumors spread that the wise prince would be one of the judges, everyone felt they had to see it for themselves. Our protagonist continues with the plan to use his defense ring to test the candidates, and he's there calmly sipping his tea on stage when one of the participants decides to go for the attack. The defense ring activates instantly and blocks the hit with a shield. The candidate repeatedly tries to break the barrier with his sword, but the thing is just too strong to be overcome, and the people watching it realize that this is the true might of the wise prince. The emperor watches the exam from above and admits that this year's competition is much more interesting than the last one, although he knows the real goal is to choose worthy knights, and that's why he's eager to see who his son will select. By sunset, one of the candidates uses all of his magic capacity to try and hit the little master with a flame attack, but the boy simply creates a barrier that keeps the heat from getting anywhere near him. The guy runs out of mana and collapses on the ground, realizing he would never make it into the royal guard. Noah notes that there hasn't been any noteworthy candidate so far, and he really wants to find someone who surprises him. The next candidate is the last of the day, so the prince isn't expecting much until a blonde young woman steps forward and strikes with her sword. The shield intercepts the attack as expected, but surprisingly she uses her brute strength to break the defense and lightly wound Noah. The prince himself is shocked by the scene, and the guards immediately arrest her and pin her down, but the little genius orders them to let her go at once. He asks the girl's name, and she replies that it's Shirley Grant. Our protagonist announces that she has just passed the exam, and everyone is speechless. After all, no one had passed all day, and now he was accepting the very person who wounded him. The guards begin to praise him, calling him a truly generous king, and shortly after, he takes Shirley to his mansion. As she kneels before him, the young woman is terrified of the punishment she might receive for hurting the prince during the test. She fears that harming royalty, even unintentionally, will bring grave consequences, but the boy quickly reassures her, telling her not to be silly because what happened was clearly an accident. He gives a light smile and surprises her by asking her to use that same thrust move on him once more. Shirley is confused but obeys the order, stands up, and advances with the sword. Noah raises his shield to block, and this time the defense doesn't break. He explains that this is what he could have done if he really wanted to block her attack the first time, but he chose not to because he wanted to see if she would follow orders faithfully without fear of hurting him. After all, a knight's duty is to follow orders, and he doesn't need someone who backs down out of fear. The fact that she attacked with full will twice proves she has the necessary courage and determination. Hearing this, the girl is amazed to see that her master has such a strong resolve despite being so young, and his confident posture shows she's following a real leader. Overflowing with respect, she kneels and swears eternal loyalty to him, promising to serve him faithfully for the rest of her days as a knight. The boy is satisfied, nods in approval, and notices by looking at his stats that having Shirley as a subordinate has significantly increased his skills. At that moment, Zoe interrupts to announce that Dr. Croy has arrived to see him. The doctor begins to examine the little prince and, after a careful evaluation, says Shirley's hit was not serious and did not strike any veins or organs. The knight watches everything with interest, noticing the professional way the doctor works, and is surprised because there are no doctors in her village. Noah notices her curiosity and asks the reason for that. Shirley explains that her village is poor and cannot pay for doctors or medical training, so when someone gets sick, they rely on prayers or rituals from the elders. The prince reflects on this and realizes the fastest way to train new doctors is through hands-on learning. He instructs Shirley to select the smartest people from the village and asks Croy to accept a few as apprentices so they can one day become skilled doctors. The doctor accepts without hesitation, and the boy announces he will cover all training expenses. Shirley spends the night at the mansion and wakes up the next morning full of determination, puts on her armor, and heads downstairs. While walking through the halls, she hears some maids gossiping about who the master will marry one day. The conversation catches her attention for a moment, but Zoe jumps into the chat saying it's far too early to talk about that since the boy is only 6 years old. However, another maid named Rihanna scoffs at the comment and tells her not to be naive, remembering that all the other princes were married by 15. Rihanna notices Zoe's expression doesn't change and quickly concludes she must be secretly in love with the prince and wants to marry him, since Zoe has been studying magic lately. The girl gets a bit nervous at first, but soon clarifies that her studies have nothing to do with marriage or love, but rather because she wants to be useful to her master for everything he's done for her. With that, she walks away anxiously, leaving the other maid with her thoughts. Meanwhile, the night selections are concluded, and the boy receives the report of the chosen ones, feeling a silent satisfaction knowing the kingdom's future is in good hands. To celebrate the success, he decides to throw a small party the next day, and invites his old friend Alici to perform that night. During the event, Byron comes to pay his respects, and Noah receives him warmly, explaining that he organized the party in part for him too, since all the merchants with royal ties are there, which is the perfect opportunity for Byron to strengthen his contacts. The party continues with lots of music and laughter until Zoe appears to report that an unusual letter has arrived. There is no sender, and the person who delivered it fled immediately after. Before opening it, Shirley warns that it could be dangerous, so the prince lightly touches the Leviathan to check for any hidden malicious intent. Since the sword doesn't react, he opens the envelope and finds a message warning about suspicious movements among the remnants of the Almerian rebels. The letter doesn't give details, but the little genius starts connecting the dots and realizes that whoever delivered the message probably infiltrated to investigate these activities. He soon deduces that the one who sent the warning was that loyal soldier who came to warn him about the rebellion a while back. Noah points out that this is terrible because if the guy is playing spy without any real training, he's only going to end up getting killed. He plans to notify his brother Henry to put an end to it, but by the next day, it's already too late, and news arrives that the soldier was discovered and tortured. Luckily, the man wasn't killed because Prince Henry's unit managed to get him out in time. The boy blames himself for not realizing it sooner and is indignant because the soldier was tortured just for not talking, thinking that no information is worth the loss of such a faithful ally. He orders Zoe to send a message to his brother's unit, telling them not to spare any expense to save the soldier's life. The next day, the little master goes out with Shirley to buy a gift for Henry as a thank you for suppressing the rebellion. He goes to an antique shop and sees several luxury items, but nothing impresses him until he notices something covered by a cloak. The merchant pulls back the cloth and reveals a stunning glass sculpture of a goddess made by the famous artisan Lindsay, with only 2 existing in the world. The boy examines the piece and decides to take it for 10,000 Ryan, but at that moment, Brother Oscar enters the shop and sees that the younger one found the treasure before him. Oscar mentions he already owns the other piece and was looking for the second one to complete his collection, but hearing that, the little prince simply destroys the sculpture. Everyone is in total shock to see the priceless work of art shattered, but the boy guarantees the shopkeeper the payment will be made. Oscar immediately understands the play. Since there is now only one sculpture in the whole world, the value of the piece his brother owns will skyrocket. The older prince admits the idea was genius and is impressed as always. Leaving the shop, Shirley asks why he destroyed such a treasure, and Noah explains that the sculpture wasn't the real treasure. It was just an object. To him, the true treasures are people willing to dedicate their lives and hearts to a cause, showing loyalty even in difficult times. The knight smiles, realizing her master is that 1-in-a-million leader she had only read about in history books, and swears to serve him forever. The boy says he plans to collect even more treasures like that, and 6 years pass, with Noah now much taller at 12 years old, accompanied by his maids and servants as he prepares to embark on yet another epic adventure. 6 years fly by and our protagonist is now a 12-year-old prince overflowing with confidence, which means he's older, stronger, and ready for some seriously absurd feats. Since he just hit this age, a massive crowd of people trying to get on his good side showed up to drop off gifts, and the line is so huge it's literally been going for 3 straight days. It's not just about receiving the loot, though, because the young man makes sure to accurately note down the name of every single person who sent something so he can return the favor down the line. And I have to admit, that's one time-consuming grind. In these last few years, he's been officially recognized for mastering the power of Leviathan, and, by a direct imperial order, he was stationed at the Ministry of Military Affairs, which gives him a ton of authority in that department. He asks Henry if there's something to discuss, and his brother mentions he received an imperial order instructing him to let a guy named Reese lead an army to crush the rebellion on the southern border. If those barbarians down there get any kind of mercy, they end up causing total chaos, so the plan is to send a military force to show them that the Empire's power is superior, and that's where this Reese guy comes in. The subject is a decorated veteran with several acts of bravery on his resume, so there's no doubt that among all of Henry's knights, he's especially talented, and there wouldn't be any issues sending him. But before any decisions are made, our little master has a crucial question. He wants to know how many soldiers Reese actually has under his command. That question leaves Henry confused, not quite getting where his brother is going with this, so the prodigy explains that armies get funding based on the number of troops they report, making it very common for generals to inflate those numbers by registering civilians or merchants who can't fight just to pocket the extra cash. Reese starts apologizing immediately, because that was exactly what he'd been doing, and Henry almost explodes with rage. But the kid stops him and explains that what the veteran did isn't exactly a world-ending problem. Sure, he lied about the soldier count, but that can even work in their favor since having more combatants on paper acts as a deterrent for the enemies. However, in this specific case, the lie gets in the way because the Emperor demands an absolute victory, and it's hard to plan for that without knowing the actual number of blades available on the field. Reese confesses he has about 2,000 real soldiers, and the prince appreciates the honesty, writing a letter addressed to the Minister of Military Affairs on the spot. The document is a request for supplies for 2,000 men with a little extra for the general to pocket, but in exchange, the boy makes it very clear that failure will not be tolerated. Later, while the two princes are heading home in their carriages, Henry comments on how impressed he was with how the youngest intimidated Reese by exposing the mistake and then motivated him by letting him keep the extra money. It's a shame the kid hasn't had a chance to experience a real war yet, because a few military achievements would make him even more unstoppable. But since he's still very young, he's basically forbidden from joining those clashes. The genius is more than capable of taking care of himself, but this rule exists because most royal babies used to die in their first year, and it wasn't because of plagues or diseases, but because the other princes tried to eliminate the competition by practicing the famous spawn camping. Henry isn't like the others and really cares about the family. He starts telling some war stories, but in the middle of the conversation, a little girl dressed in rags runs out of an alley straight onto the road. This scares the horses and forces the carriage to stop, making Henry wonder what's going on while the girl begs for help. A moment later, a group of kids comes running out of the alley, followed by several men who grab them and try to drag them back. Our protagonist intervenes immediately and demands they stop right there. It's clear the children are slaves, and since slavery isn't illegal in that nation, he can't arrest them just for that. But he can punish them for trafficking without official registration, so he demands the paperwork. The men don't have any documents, and even seeing that the kids stepped out of a carriage with the royal insignia, they decide to attack. The result is that the little master simply mops the floor with the goons' faces, though he makes sure not to kill them right away. He goes over to the little ones and asks if the men were trying to sell them, which they all confirm through tears. But right after that, a wrinkled old man comes out of the alley and says there's nothing wrong with what he's doing because he works for Prince Gilbert. Even if unregistered trafficking is illegal, if that guy really had Gilbert's backing, the kid's hands would be tied, and knowing the guy, he probably did hire the man to traffic the children. However, our hero has the perfect solution. He says out loud that the old man is lying and knocks him out with one hit before he could show any proof of his connection to Gilbert. This way he saves the kids and still maintains plausible deniability in case he's accused of disrespecting his brother's authority. He plans to take the little ones to his mansion to hear what they have to say, and as for the criminals, he decides to ship them off to Gilbert's house so he can deal with the situation himself. That night, while Albert and Gilbert are having dinner together, the protagonist receives a message from the latter, thanking him for capturing the bandits and claiming he had nothing to do with them, as he would never support illegal trafficking. Normally, the criminals would be taken for interrogation, but conveniently, they all decided to take their own lives at the same time while no one was looking. The genius isn't a fool and knows exactly what's happening. Gilbert killed the traffickers, so no information could link him to those deplorable acts. Henry isn't surprised since he knows the older brother is involved in a lot of shady business, but since he is the first prince and a concubine's son who can't inherit the throne, he ends up venting his frustrations however he can. The brother is impressed that the youngest figured this out so fast without ever talking much to Gilbert, but the kid thinks it's not hard to deduce things given the guy's track record. The best the protagonist can do now is pull some strings to ensure the rescued children are no longer at risk of being sold. He says everyone is free to go, but the little ones don't seem very excited because, in truth, they have nowhere to go back to. They were all sold by their own families for various reasons, so returning home would mean being enslaved all over again. The genius doesn't want to leave them to fate and announces he is willing to take them all in, asking Dylan to prepare the accommodations. He also promises that any child who wants to study will receive full support for it. The little ones ask if this means he plans to buy them, but the prince clarifies that he doesn't want slaves, he wants loyal subordinates, and that if any of them wants to leave for any reason, he won't stop them. Being treated with such kindness is something totally new for those children, who don't even know how to react. But they are extremely grateful and follow Dylan to take a bath and get cleaned up. With this, they'll be able to have happy lives from now on, which brings a smile to the kid's face, but he soon remembers he still has a pending task. The next day, Evelyn comes to report that all the birthday gifts have been received and cataloged, but he says that isn't the most important thing right now because he has something serious to talk to her about. He announces that he is firing her from her position as a maid, but not because she did anything wrong. His goal is for her to become the administrator of a region in Almeria, which is a huge honor since it turns her into a government official. It's natural that the prince can't govern such a vast area alone, so he needs to appoint trusted administrators to manage local affairs. He's been watching Evelyn for years, and is certain she is the smartest among all his maids, making her perfect for the task. She is grateful for the recognition, but says she'd rather keep working at the mansion to be at his service. However, the master explains that she will provide an even greater service by accepting the position, because if she does a good job, the whole kingdom will know the prince has an excellent eye for talent, and that way she'll help him even from afar. Evelyn accepts the challenge, and the knight Shirley is impressed with how the kid takes care of his subordinates, commenting that he is infinitely better than Gilbert in that department, although the prince warns her she shouldn't say those things out loud so she doesn't get into trouble. A little while later, the little master is summoned to a meeting with the sovereign to discuss that terrible incident with the child traffickers. The narrative Gilbert used to dodge the heat was that those scoundrels were using his name without permission, and that he had absolutely nothing to do with the dirty work. The kid knows very well that this is a blatant lie, but since he has no proof to debunk his brother's version, especially with all the criminals already dead and buried, there isn't much he can do right now. Speaking of the crooks, the emperor asks if his son knows the punishment for illegal slave trading. The genius pulls from his memory and recalls that, according to the law, the ringleader should have his arm cut off, while any others involved must be forcibly recruited into the army, and his father confirms he hit the nail on the head. The sovereign mentions he heard the criminals attacked him during the confrontation, but since the prodigy was so much more skilled, he didn't suffer a single scratch. The king confesses that things probably wouldn't have ended so well for him if he had been in his son's shoes, as he would have been undercover to hide his royal identity and might have hesitated to act, which would have left him vulnerable to injury. The prime minister jumps into the conversation joking that if one of those thugs actually wounded the emperor, it would be an imperial crime with a guaranteed death penalty, but the boy interrupts him on the spot to say he's wrong. According to the law, if a member of royalty fails to identify themselves as such, no act committed against them can be classified as an imperial crime, since the attacker was unaware of the victim's status. The little master is technically correct, but that worry kicks in that he might have crossed a line. After all, correcting the king's right-hand man in front of so many people could be seen as pretty rude. To his surprise, both the father and the minister burst out laughing, revealing they had made a little bet to see if the boy would have the guts to correct the mistake. The sovereign always knew his son has an unshakable sense of justice, so he was just testing to see if the boy would be capable of calling out someone misquoting the law. And now that he's sure the heir's character is pure, he stands up and announces before everyone that he's appointing the kid as the new minister of justice. Later, upon arriving at the ministry, the genius is introduced to Vinny, the vice minister. The prince notices right away that the guy is young and talented, so he asks for a breakdown of his new duties. Vinny clarifies that the Ministry of Justice coordinates all the country's courts and also judges many cases happening in the capital, meaning the little master will have to act as a judge. The kid expected as much, but asks if Vinny also judges cases from time to time, and the deputy confirms he handles a case or two depending on the situation. Hearing this, the prodigy moves to the next question and asks the colleague how many bribes he usually accepts. Vinny is in shock and loses his words, but the master guarantees he's not in trouble. The goal is just to understand the real situation of the ministry, promising that if he's honest, there will be no punishment. The vice minister gets the message and admits he accepts bribes, usually a few hundred rian a year, but points out he has a personal rule about not accepting certain types of payments. Most other judges don't have this filter and end up taking 10 times more bribes than he does. The genius is intrigued and asks what that rule is, and Vinny explains he never accepts money in cases related to murder. Not necessarily for a moral reason, but because it would be too easy to get caught, since if he let a killer go, the victim's family would know there was corruption and might come after him for revenge. Because of that, he prefers to keep the bribes to low-risk cases. The boy understands the logic, takes a piece of paper, and writes a 5,000 rian check for the subordinate. He explains that if the guy accepts 500 rian a year, this amount covers 10 times that sum, so from now on, he wants the habit of taking bribes to end. Vinny is marveled by the prince's rationality and can see why the king gave him the title of wise so early. He decides right then that he wants to be loyal to the boy and says he doesn't even need the extra money, agreeing to stop the corruption just for the privilege of serving him faithfully. Normally, the little master would be suspicious of ulterior motives, but looking at his status screen, he notices he received a power bonus coming from Vinny's loyalty, which proves the declaration was sincere. After that, the genius is having dinner with Oscar at his mansion, and the brother notices he's a bit suspicious, but guarantees that banquet is just a celebration to congratulate him on the new position. After all, after Henry, the boy is the second prince to be named a minister. The prodigy thanks him for the gesture, but still finds everything very strange because in Henry's case, he earned the post after crushing a rebellion, while the little master has no grand military feat to justify such a title. He suspects the emperor has other plans in mind and asks the brother if he remembers the story of when the empire nearly collapsed. According to history, the chaos happened because of the old rule that only the first prince could inherit the throne. While it seems normal, it generated a lot of revolt because the rest of the royal family, knowing they would never have to take on responsibilities, spent all their time just having fun without worries, which obviously didn't end well. Because of that, a new rule was created. Each prince would receive a fief at birth, and the one with the best performance in their duties would be named the crown prince. In that moment, Oscar realizes where the youngest is going, stands up abruptly, and asks if the father is really thinking of making him the successor to the throne. The genius says he isn't sure, but that it's a real possibility, and a moment later, one of Oscar's men arrives to warn that the sovereign plans to put him in command of the Ministry of Finance the next morning. This confirms the kid's theory. The king is indeed looking for someone to replace Albert as crown prince. Meanwhile, in another part of the kingdom, the royal knights carry out an operation to arrest a group planning to overthrow the emperor. The sovereign receives the news that night, and from the interrogation, it seems the group was trying to force him to abdicate to put Albert in power. It's very clear that this was a plan by the firstborn to take the throne, and I have to admit it's even hard to blame him entirely, since the guy has been the crown prince for 30 years, and the father shows no sign that he's going to retire. Even so, attempting an insurrection is a very serious crime, but since there is no direct evidence linking Albert to the act, punishing him will be complicated. As for the others involved in the plot, they will certainly face execution. The next day, as the little master is in command of the Ministry of Justice, the case is brought to him to decide the punishment. It's a very direct process, as everyone was caught red-handed conspiring against the crown, and although there is no proof against the older brother, it's obvious he was behind everything because the executors were part of his inner circle. Vinny asks what the prince plans to do, and normally by imperial law it's very rare for royalty to be punished for crimes, but there is one exception: cases of insurrection. In those situations, the penalty is death, whether you are a noble or a nobody, and even if a prince claims innocence, just the fact of knowing about the plan and not stopping it is enough for the executioner to act. With so many close people involved, it would be impossible for Albert not to notice anything. If the little master wanted to, he could accuse the brother of treason and send him to the grave, but he knows that's not what the father wants. Noah decides to play a bit of legal chess to prevent the scandal of a prince trying to seize the throne from becoming a national disaster, so he moves with extreme caution. Later on, he meets with the emperor to discuss the sentence he planned out, and explains that he intends to immediately execute everyone who was arrested at the scene of the conspiracy. The fact that the sovereign hasn't openly confronted Albert yet means he has no intention of punishing him, but if one of the accomplices decided to spill the beans and snitch on the crown prince, it would be almost impossible to hush up the gossip. That's why the heir wants to wipe them out as soon as possible. The emperor is blown away seeing how the genius was able to deduce his intentions without a single word being spoken, so as a reward, he grants Noah a budget increase and mentions he has high hopes for his future. After that, the protagonist heads back home, but as he gets closer, he notices something terrible. 2 of his front gate guards are lying on the ground with serious wounds. He rushes to help them, but realizes one has already kicked the bucket, while the other can barely whisper a warning that the intruders who did this are still inside. The little master sprints in to handle the situation, and finds several of his men fallen and injured as he runs through the halls. He finally runs into one of the intruders, just as the guy was preparing to finish off one of his servants, so the prince charges in and proceeds to slice the intruder's limbs down to the bone. The criminal tries to commit suicide by biting off his own tongue to avoid interrogation, but the boy stops him by stuffing a piece of magic metal down the poor guy's throat. Right after that, 3 more intruders show up and attack all at once, but the genius is so fast he manages to cut them down in less than a second. Moments later, Vinny shows up looking for his boss and breathes a sigh of relief seeing that the prince is fine, even though the scene around them is devastating. Even though all the intruders were taken out, many of the mansion's guards are in critical condition. The heir is intrigued to learn that all the intruders were killed by his guards, because normally they'd be kept alive for questioning. This indicates that someone is trying to tie up loose ends and hide their involvement in the invasion, leading the boy to believe these men are connected to Albert in some way. It would be a total mess if the link between the crown prince and this attack came to light, so the protagonist needs an excuse to execute the survivors he stopped from offing themselves. Under imperial law, harming a member of the royal family is grounds for immediate execution, so the master simply drives a blade into his own abdomen and orders Vinny to report that the intruders did this to him, ensuring they'll be killed before they can snitch on Albert. I have to confess I was in shock at this kid's guts. The guy actually wounded himself just to protect the family legacy. A few minutes later, while Noah's wound is being treated, Vinny informs him that the executions were carried out as ordered, and the prince feels relieved knowing the assassination attempt by Albert won't become a stain on the royalty's name. Later, the emperor summons his son for a talk about what happened, and the sovereign is no fool. He knows very well that a bunch of random intruders would never be able to lay a finger on the boy, so he concludes that he injured himself on purpose. The father perfectly understands the reason and feels an immense pride seeing that the heir was capable of going that far just to protect the family's history. He invites the genius for a walk in the garden and mentions that it's common for great emperors to have their reputation tarnished at the end of their lives, referring to the fact that if he were overthrown, the usurper would likely claim he had become senile and unfit to rule. They both know the usurper in question is Albert, and the sovereign clearly doesn't trust his eldest son at all right now, with the only reason for not punishing him yet being the mark it would leave on his own story. The protagonist then suggests a brilliant solution to the problem. Since the emperor recently appointed Henry, Oscar, and Noah himself as prince ministers, he proposes creating a whole new position called the Prime Minister Prince, who would oversee the work of the other three. He nominates Albert for the job, but the sovereign rejects the idea on the spot, refusing to give that much power to the traitor. However, the boy explains that he understands Albert's impatience to take the throne after waiting 30 years, and that this would be a way to calm him down, giving him control and power, even if it's just symbolic. The emperor understands the reasoning, but fears that if he gives this power to the eldest son, he might prevent the other three from bringing important matters to his attention. For that, the genius already had the perfect solution. He suggests adding a clause where if all the prince ministers agree that a matter is serious enough, they can ignore Albert and go straight to the emperor. The father loves the idea because it means Albert will have no real power, but it will still be enough to stop him from lashing out. The sovereign is extremely grateful for this strategic way out and decides to reward his son, but since money would be too little for such a feat, he invites him to the royal vault. He lets the boy choose any item he wants, and the little master enters the place with Leviathan's help, deciding on a special box, but the second he opens it, he ends up being swallowed by intense flames. The heir soon realizes that the artifact has a consciousness of its own, just like his sword, and knowing exactly how to handle the situation, he uses Leviathan to pierce through the fire in one go and show who's boss. Now that he has established himself as the master of the artifact, the flames recede and he's left holding a powerful ring. With the luthier ring in his possession, the protagonist receives a massive buff to his fire magic stats, and the emperor is amazed at how fast he tamed the item, though he should have expected that from his prodigy son. The father asks if he wants to test the new power on some targets, but the genius says he has something better in mind. He takes the sovereign to a clearing in the woods and activates the luthier, but instead of aiming at something far away, he launches the fire against his own body. The emperor is worried for a second, but the boy guarantees everything is under control, as he only wanted to test the ring's strength compared to Leviathan. As he predicted, the water sword is a bit stronger and allows him to keep the flames under total control. Furthermore, he manages to restrict the fire's range to ensure his father's safety, demonstrating a level of control over an artifact he just got that is simply unbelievable. The sovereign formally entrusts the luthier to his son and asks him to use it for the good of the empire. A little later, the heir is taken before the king as the Minister of Justice to judge a specific internal affairs case. It turns out that Graham, the emperor's brother, has a nephew who is a real problem and who has always ruled his domain tyrannically, but this time the guy crossed the line and killed an innocent person for no reason. Graham took responsibility for what happened and even offered to pay a heavy fine to end the matter, but the protagonist warns his father that they can't accept Graham's money because he didn't commit any crime. By imperial law, just as a child cannot be blamed for the mistakes of the parents, a parent or tutor cannot be held responsible for the crimes of the child. The sovereign agrees with the reasoning and is sure that Graham knows this, but is trying to buy their silence to hush up the case. The amount offered was 30,000 rian, which is equivalent to 250 times the average yearly income, a very high value. But the little master insists that, according to the law, you cannot accept fines from someone who hasn't broken any rules. The emperor then questions whether they should change the law to allow voluntary payment of fines, as the imperial treasury needs extra funds. The heir understands the point, but explains it would be a terrible idea to create a law like that, because people would start believing they can get away with any crime as long as they have enough money, making the fight against crime an impossible challenge. He recognizes that the kingdom needs the cash, but believes they should find a more respectable way to get those funds. The sovereign realizes his son is right and is so impressed that he decides to grant him the honorary title of his premier advisor. The young man is grateful for his new title of wise, and it gives him a sensational idea to fill the empire's coffers. He suggests to his father that the government could grant honorary titles to anyone willing to deposit 1,000 rein into the national treasury. After all, most people love the idea of receiving an honor directly from the emperor. And when someone accumulates more money than they can spend, they usually start seeking social prestige. This way, there would be no shortage of people willing to open their wallets. The sovereign thinks the proposal is brilliant and asks his prime minister to summon Oscar immediately to implement the measure, since he is the current minister of finance. Hearing this, the protagonist decides to leave for today so as not to encroach on his brother's area of authority, but as soon as he leaves the palace, he finds a group of onlookers gathered around that hole he made earlier with his magic. At that moment, a man named Shizu approaches and explains that everyone is intrigued because they have no idea how the ground melted in such a way, even mentioning that one of them fell inside trying to understand the phenomenon, which the boy actually finds funny. He hands a bag of money to Shizu and asks that no expense be spared to treat the injured person, since he feels responsible for what happened, and the man thanks the prince for being generous as always. The little master notices that Shizu is carrying something and asks what it is, discovering it's a box of rhinoceros beetles. Apparently, the 16th prince loves watching these insects fight and asked that some be captured for him. The protagonist finds the idea of seeing creatures fight quite intriguing and, during the carriage ride home, decides to test something similar with Leviathan and the luthier ring. He asks his artifacts if they would be willing to face each other in a battle, and both seem quite excited by the challenge, manifesting miniature forms and starting to duke it out right there. The young man watches with interest as the two fight non-stop, but in the end, the water sword is still slightly superior to the fire ring and wins the duel. One of Noah's maids ends up seeing the scene and is very curious, as she has never seen anything like it, but she soon realizes it's impolite to watch what the master is doing without permission, and apologizes for the intrusion. The boy says he doesn't mind, and even offers to show more since Luthier seems to want a rematch. The prince wonders if he can get stronger just by watching the two fight, and upon checking his status screen, his theory is confirmed as he notices his level just went up. After returning home, he makes the two artifacts duel a dozen more times, and so far Leviathan has won every single fight. But with each round, Luthier's technique improves a bit until he finally manages to defeat the sword. After this last battle, not only did Noah's level rise once more, but the ring's rank also increased a bit, which means the master's items can evolve by facing each other, and he gains experience from the whole process. Zoe is amazed because this basically means the prince can increase his level indefinitely without even needing to go out and hunt. But the boy warns it's not that simple. The first time the level went up, a single fight was enough, but for the second level up, 10 battles were required, so the experience needed probably scales with each level. Right at that time, Henry shows up looking for his brother and warns that he is about to be sent on his first official mission. Apparently, a monster nest nearby has started causing trouble, and the protagonist was tasked with handling the situation. To decide how many soldiers the boy will need to take, Henry brings a special magic box. For this type of mission, you don't want to take too many or too few soldiers, so the box analyzes the leader's capabilities and suggests the ideal number of troops. However, when the genius touches the object, the box prints the number 1, indicating that only the boy alone is enough to handle the job. Henry is in shock, as it's the first time something like this has happened, but I wanted to comment that at this point, nothing else surprises me coming from this kid. Later, while the prince is reading a book in his office, he is informed that someone wants to see him and asks them to enter. The person in question is Reese, who brings a message from the emperor. By imperial customs, whoever delivers a message from the sovereign must be treated as the king's own proxy and receive full respect, so the master kneels before Reese to hear the message. The official informs that, by imperial orders, the mission has been postponed until further notice and, after fulfilling the duty, Rhys kneels before the boy to show his respect as a knight. As a member of Henry's house, the soldier must follow etiquette rules with any prince, no matter who it is. Noah asks if he knows the reason for the postponement, since he feels more than capable of solving everything on his own, and Rhys explains that it's precisely because he is so talented that his father decided to postpone. The Emperor wants to turn the mission into a major public event so the entire empire can witness his son's greatness, and if that's the case, the boy assumes it will take a while to prepare everything. In the meantime, the protagonist decides to go to the local artifact merchant to see if he has any sentient items in stock, but unfortunately, the man says he hasn't found anything of that type lately. The heir is a bit disappointed, but already expected it to be hard to find something like that, so he hands a bag of money to the shopkeeper and asks him to keep an eye out for anything new. He even promises an extra reward if he finds something good, and although the prince is being generous, I think if the Empire's treasury is low, he shouldn't be handing out coins everywhere like that. The young man prepares to return home, but as he leaves the market, he notices a commotion involving a man who is threatening a shop owner because the shopkeeper refused to sell an item that was already reserved for another customer. The subject, named Dalam, was famous for this abusive behavior, but no one could do anything because his status made him practically untouchable. However, the master shouts for him to stop, and as soon as the bully recognizes him as the 13th prince, he doesn't even seem very worried. The boy warns that what he was doing counts as intimidation and is a serious offense, but Dalam corrects him, saying he belongs to Prince Gilbert's house, and by imperial law, he cannot be convicted of any crime other than murder or treason, which means even the protagonist could not punish him for something minor. The genius knows he's right and that normally there would be nothing to do, but then he remembers the rule that requires members of an imperial house to show respect to all princes when meeting them. He uses this as an excuse to accuse the man of disrespecting the royal family and orders Shirley to arrest him. While she keeps him pinned to the ground, the master asks if anyone has something to punish the aggressor, and the shopkeepers, who hate the guy, waste no time in bringing a whip. Dalam is tied to a post and Shirley asks how many lashes she should give. The prince comments that if Gilbert found out one of his men was using borrowed authority to terrorize the people, he would certainly give the death penalty, so that's exactly what he plans for the criminal. After a long and painful session of lashings, Dalam's death is confirmed. The heir does not regret anything but realizes he went a bit too far since Dalam was one of Gilbert's men, so he decides to go to his brother's mansion to apologize. To make the apology more convincing, he asks Shirley to put him in handcuffs. Arriving at the firstborn's estate, the boy explains the incident in detail and asks for forgiveness for not discussing the matter before making the decision. Gilbert seems quite cool with everything and says the brother did nothing wrong, as the deceased was not someone worth worrying about. On the contrary, the older brother thinks the younger one did him a favor by protecting his reputation from a man who committed crimes in the name of royalty and, with that, formally forgives the incident. With the situation resolved, the master and the knight leave the mansion. But on the way, Shirley asks if it was really necessary for him to handcuff himself to apologize, since Gilbert was so chill. The prodigy reveals that, in reality, his brother was furious the whole time. But because he went to apologize immediately and in a humble way, the other couldn't take out his anger and was forced to accept the apology. The next day, the protagonist is at home when he receives word that a member of the imperial family has come to see him, and upon accepting the meeting, he is introduced to a man named Don. The visitor says he heard much about the boy's exceptional abilities and states he would like to serve him right there, which the master accepts. But as the prince feels there is something strange about this subject, he asks Dylan to do a full investigation into his background. The faithful butler Dylan approaches the little master with some crucial intel regarding that man who offered his services to House Noah. According to the investigation, Don Ortz's parents are actually servants of the first prince, Gilbert, and as everyone knows, the residence of an imperial prince is monitored from every imaginable angle. The staff there are forced to keep everything that happens inside a total secret, and by the Lord's own recommendation, it is common for the servants to marry each other, creating a lineage where the children are born already swearing loyalty to their master, which is exactly the case with Ortz. It's obvious that the first prince sent this servant as a spy, so our protagonist asks Dylan not to tell anyone about the discovery, since they can use this information to their advantage in the future. The butler is impressed by the genius's ability to identify an infiltrator with just a glance, But the boy knows it wasn't just intuition. After all, even after granting permission for Don Orts to work under his supervision, not a single loyalty point went up on his attribute screen, which made everything crystal clear for someone with a broken system like his. Changing the subject, the butler explains that someone from Bardsley's shop asked to see him, claiming they found the treasure he's been searching for. Shortly after, Alan Bardsley is invited to meet with the heir to show off the valuable item. When he pulls the cloth off the object, it reveals a painting of a young woman standing right in the center of a famous artist's work. As soon as the little master gets close, he realizes the painting is cursed. Alan then brings out a second painting identical to the first, a replica made at the same time as the original, describing it as a cursed image that grows. The little genius gets close to the original canvas and senses, through Leviathan, that something unusual is emanating from it. He draws his sword and strikes the canvas, causing a burst of green light. At that very same moment, the woman portrayed in the art comes to life and awakens from a deep sleep, stepping out of the painting through magic. Understanding the strange way this mysterious figure communicates, the boy realizes the painting was made with her own blood, and that whoever created it killed the girl when she was still a child to mix her blood into the paint. I have to confess I found that part pretty dark. Since the woman wishes to repay the favor of being liberated, she swears loyalty to the prince and gains the ability to enter and exit paintings whenever she wants, now that the seal has been cut. Beyond that, the master receives a small increase to his earth attribute and discovers that the woman, named Leveza, has the power to transform into other people with perfect accuracy, which she demonstrates by becoming an identical copy of Alan Bardsley. The heir then enchants her with his ring and asks Alan to touch her with both hands. His left hand touches the body normally, but his right passes straight through her. The boy was testing the possibilities, understanding that her materialization depends on the link with the armor ring, which ensures a full transformation capability. Later on, the prince receives a visit from the merchant Byron Allen. According to the merchant, Ada won the struggle and officially became a concubine in the palace, so he came to reward the master for it. Ada was the woman Byron offered as a servant 6 years ago on the boy's own recommendation. Now promoted to queen consort, Noah examines the gifts the merchant brought and evaluates them at 30,000 leans, which leaves Byron shocked by the precision of the calculation. The merchant hopes that one day she might become a secondary consort, explaining the harem hierarchy. Concubines at the bottom, then secondary consorts, queen consorts above them, and at the top the empress as the legitimate wife. The success of an heir depends heavily on their status and the favor they receive from the sovereign. For example, our protagonist's mother became a queen consort the moment he earned the title of sage. The man hopes for more imperial favor so that Ada can rise in rank, but the little master warns that from now on, this is pure politics. The fastest way is winning the emperor's attention, but the schemes among the queens are decisive. He brings up the possibility of someone swapping Ada's perfume for a fragrance the king hates, since the harem is a place full of betrayals and plots. After Byron leaves, the boy asks Zoe to deliver a letter and 10,000 leans to his mother. The maid thinks the merchant could deliver it more easily, but the prince explains that men are not allowed inside the harem where his mother lives, and that is why he only sees her once a year, since princes are separated from their mothers right after birth. He asks Zoe to tell his mother that he intends to be the guardian of the concubine Ada. The boy never wanted to get involved in politics, but unfortunately, that is how royalty works, where profit and honor matter more than affection. If Ada rises in rank, she will be an excellent ally for his mother. Taking advantage of the talk, the master asks how Zoe's mother is doing, and she explains that thanks to him, the lady lives in the capital with the simple job of opening and closing the back gate. However, Zoe says that last night, her mother heard a noise and saw the shadow of a man hiding, which might indicate an attempted break-in. Grateful for the warning, the boy asks them not to tell anyone. When night falls and the employee goes to close the gate, someone appears from behind, applies a chokehold and sticks a needle into her neck, making her pass out. The one responsible for this is none other than Don Orts, who flees after knocking the woman down. Hidden in a nearby bush, the little genius was watching everything with Zoe and her real mother. They discover that the woman attacked was a target of Orts, likely an attempt to silence her for having seen the spy that day. After completing the job, Leveza, who was disguised, leaves behind a replica of the fallen body and departs. The master asks Zoe and her mother to return to Dasso with the fake body for a while to pretend she died, as she would certainly be a target again. But Zoe is worried about the man who escaped. Calmly, the prince says he ordered Leviathan to keep an eye on him. The next day, Don Orts wakes up wounded in an isolated house next to our protagonist. While Shirley Grant stands guard outside, the spy feels pain while trying to move, and the boy explains that, as predicted, Don almost died. The prince reveals that after the spy reported eliminating the witness, he was stabbed by the very contact serving as the link to Gilbert. In short, he was discarded like trash for making a spy mistake. Luckily, Leviathan was nearby to save him. The master remembers when he said people are like treasures, though he is increasingly convinced of the opposite. Don Orts understands why the boy is called the Wise One, since he predicted his death, and regrets not staying on the prince's side from the beginning. Regarding that, the boy says he doesn't mind if he starts now, leaving the man stunned. On the other hand, the heir makes it clear that he is even stricter regarding betrayal, and that if he swears loyalty, Orts cannot leave that house until he is dead. The sage guarantees he will not abandon the subordinate either, and, moved, Orts begs to be accepted. The master notices his wind attribute gained an increase, proof that the loyalty is now real. He orders the man to focus on healing, provides a new name and identity, and announces he will adopt him as the son of a fallen noble, arranging a magistrate position in Almeria until things settle down. Without words to thank him, Orts decides to pay it back by revealing bombshell information about his former master, Prince Gilbert. With this intel, the protagonist rushes to his father to ask him to stop drinking the Phoenix beverage immediately. The sovereign asks if it is the drink produced in Gilbert's domain, and the son confirms it, explaining it is nutritious if consumed alone. But when mixed with certain elements, like dragon's claw, it turns into a terrible poison. The emperor has been consuming this during the annual ceremony with Crown Prince Albert. According to the boy, the drink has been offered for almost a year, and they drink it daily, which removes the suspicion of immediate poisoning, when in fact, the poison spreads slowly and fatally. The father questions if he is sure, and the son says he tested the mixture on a condemned prisoner, and the effect was instant. If they keep drinking, the emperor and the crown prince will die during the ceremony. Faced with the evidence, the king recognizes his son's incredible investigative work, uncovering a conspiracy that would have killed the two most important members of the royal family. He orders them to call Henry, send troops to Gilbert's residence, and investigate everything. That night, after the army invades Gilbert's mansion and finds evidence of experiments with slaves to test the poison, Gilbert's plan to become the ruler is dismantled. Before that, while the boy was leaving the throne room, he felt an unease. After all, his father's intelligence network was always impeccable and left him speechless several times, but for some reason, it didn't reveal this conspiracy. Suspicious, the prince looks back and sees his father approaching. The sovereign recognizes his son's intelligence, but reveals that he already knew about the plot and didn't even drink that Phoenix beverage. Knowing he has held the crown for a long time, the emperor sees that many cannot wait any longer to get their hands on it. On the other hand, he sees that his youngest son is not like that, and recognizing his merit, names the boy as Vice Minister of Military Affairs, a position he will hold alongside Minister of Justice and Commander-in-Chief of the First Army, the king's personal guard. The boy doesn't understand the reason for so much power, but the father explains that he doesn't intend to give up easily, because being overthrown by a son would be a joke for future generations. But if that happens, the little master must take control of the capital with his imperial guard and choose a worthy man to be the new emperor. A little while later, Noah meets with the emperor and Albert to discuss the results of the investigation into Gilbert. Damning documents were found in the first prince's mansion, proving beyond a shadow of a doubt that he was the mastermind behind the assassination plot. The emperor asks what our protagonist thinks should be done, and following the letter of the law, an attempt on the sovereign's life is treason, which means Gilbert should be cut in half at the waist. Albert fully agrees, believing that a public execution is the correct fate for anyone trying to usurp the throne, but the little master notices that his father is still hesitant. He then proposes a clever alternative, reducing the charge from treason to attempted murder. Although the death sentence remains the same, the date of execution would be entirely at the emperor's discretion. Albert doesn't quite get the point of this, but the genius is looking at the situation from both an emotional and legal perspective. Gilbert tried to kill the emperor, but he is still the man's son, so it's natural for a father to hesitate to kill his own blood. This way, they effectively turn a death sentence into a life sentence in practice. The sovereign appreciates the consideration, But since Albert insists that the crime must be paid for in blood, the Emperor eventually gives in and lets Albert decide the final execution date. Once the eldest brother leaves the room, the father confesses to Noah that he would normally grant him Gilbert's lands as a reward, but since the boy gave him the tip in private, giving a prize now would draw too much attention and make the other princes start hunting for each other's mistakes out of pure greed. The Emperor informs him that there will be no reward this time, and the boy understands perfectly. Changing the subject, the father reminds him that Noah will soon have to move back to his own territory, so it is high time he thinks about a future wife. The little master had almost forgotten about this detail, but getting engaged around age 12 is the standard in the imperial family. Since a first wife is chosen solely for political reasons, the boy has no say in the decision, but he tries to make it as favorable as possible. The Emperor suggests he marry his uncle's granddaughter, his second cousin. Apparently, a divination revealed they will have an extremely intelligent child, which would be an absurd strategic advantage, and the protagonist accepts the arrangement without issue. The Emperor promises to start marriage negotiations as soon as possible. Back at home, Noah calls Don for a meeting, and the man falls into a total panic, remembering that the prince hates betrayal more than anything, and that he technically just betrayed his old master, Gilbert. He accepts his fate and begs only for a painless death, but the boy tells him to get up because he isn't the type to execute allies on a whim. The master explains he called him for 2 reasons. First, to let him know that Gilbert has already been sentenced and lost all power, so no one will be hunting Don anymore. Second, since he provided the intel that helped with the capture, he earned a reward that the prince increased from 1,000 to 10,000 Ryan. The prodigy even offers help for him to get a position, and Don, deeply grateful, swears to serve him for the rest of his life. With the spy now properly rewarded, Noah calls Zoe and lets her know that with Gilbert's fall, her mother no longer needs to live in hiding, which makes the maid cry with gratitude. Later, while walking through town with his maid, the prince notices a huge commotion and decides to see what it is. He finds a young woman challenging onlookers to an old-fashioned street brawl. The rules are simple. You pay a fee of 3 Rian and fight one-on-one. If she wins, she keeps the money. If you win, she becomes your slave. This sounds like a terrible idea, and the boy thinks about shutting the event down. But although illegal trafficking is forbidden, the law says nothing about someone selling themselves into slavery of their own free will, so technically there is no crime. A confident guy accepts the challenge, but in a few seconds he ends up on the ground, completely humiliated. Over the next few minutes, 15 more challengers try their luck, and all are defeated with incredible ease until no one else dares to take a step forward. Eventually, a man decides to challenge her, but refuses to pay the fee because he's sure he will win. He attacks without warning, and as the girl prepares for a counterattack, she feels a part of her body go numb and ends up knocked out by a powerful punch. The crowd is speechless at the quick defeat, and the cheater declares that she is now his slave, but the little master intervenes and points out that he broke the rules. The fight was supposed to be one-on-one, but the guy had an accomplice who shot a paralyzing dart at the girl. The man tries to deny it, but the genius has already identified the helper and uses his magical pressure to make him faint, proving that this Chad guy was using dirty tricks. Enraged at being unmasked, Chad charges at the prince, but the result is the same as always. Noah makes a few warning slashes and the idiot collapses on the ground, running away shortly after to avoid further humiliation. The girl wakes up a bit later on a bench with the protagonist by her side. He asks if she remembers what happened, and with her memory fuzzy, she says she only remembers her legs going numb mid-fight. The boy explains the dart trick and gives her a lecture, saying it's a stupid idea to offer herself as a slave in a bet like that. She reveals she is completely broke and came to the city to participate in the night selection exam of the 10th prince, but she didn't pass and had no way to get back home. The little master is confused because such a skilled fighter should have passed easily, but the girl reveals the rotten side of the story. The 10th prince called her in private and said she would only pass if she performed certain sexual favors for him. Since she refused, he failed her on the spot. Noah knows his brother is exactly that kind of trash and decides to help the warrior, giving her 100 Rian so she can live in the city until the next exam, and orders his maid to prepare accommodations for her. At this point, the fighter begins to realize the boy is no ordinary commoner. Unfortunately, Chad wasn't smart enough to get the message and returns with a group of friends to try and beat up the prince. The result is a memorable thrashing, and upon finishing, the protagonist notices one of the 10th prince's knights watching everything. Because the soldier didn't stop the attack, it's clear he was paid to let the bullies act, but upon recognizing that the victim was the 13th prince, the knight kneels, begging for forgiveness. Since the soldier didn't actually attack, the boy decides to let it go, but warns that Chad and his gang will be punished. The warrior finally connects the dots and realizes she is standing before one of the most important figures in the kingdom, left impressed by his humility throughout the whole conversation. At that moment, Noah notices a man sitting on a bench clapping, and immediately recognizes the emperor's uncle, the Lightning Prince, Indra Ararat. Decades ago, when the current sovereign took the throne, he was too young to rule, and Indra acted as his proxy, keeping the empire on track until the emperor was old enough to take over. When that happened, Indra withdrew from politics without causing trouble, and went to live in his fief, being a man worthy of all respect. Indra is happy to be recognized, but since he doesn't like formalities, he calls his grandnephew to sit by his side. He asks if the boy knows why he is there, and Noah deduces the uncle came to evaluate him, since he is going to marry his granddaughter. Indra confirms it and says that if the genius didn't live up to expectations, he simply wouldn't allow the marriage. The boy reminds him that this would be going against an imperial decree, but the old man knows the emperor respects him too much to use technicalities against him, since he practically raised him. The veteran explains that while he respects the king's authority, when it comes to his precious granddaughter, he needs to ensure the husband is someone of value. The little master asks if he passed the test, and, in that instant, an invisible force begins to press down on him from all sides. He recognizes the technique, as it is the same one he uses to subdue opponents and prepares for a counterattack. However, he realizes he is probably much stronger than his uncle in his advanced age and decides to take it easy so as not to humiliate the elderly man in public. Indra feels the pressure the boy releases and recognizes right away that the boy is worthy of his granddaughter, especially noting that he was holding back out of respect. Satisfied, the old man asks him to take good care of the girl in the future, and the prince accepts without hesitation. To celebrate, Indra decides they should all go get a drink and tosses a ring to Noah as a personal gift. As soon as the boy grabs the item, a deep and powerful voice echoes in his mind, and the world around him changes instantly. He finds himself alone in an open field, and before he can understand what's happening, a massive magic bull charges toward him at maximum speed. The creature orders the prince to prove he is worthy of its power, and as the genius already knows how this works, he draws Leviathan and strikes the bull down with a calm blow. The beast submits to its new master, and the boy notices in his stats that his light attribute gained a huge bonus. The protagonist returns to the real world, and Indra notices from the boy's look what happened. The defeated creature is the Behemoth, an extremely powerful magic beast with special abilities. While listening to the explanation, the little master puts on the ring and touches a nearby kettle, which, in that same instant, turns into solid gold. The uncle is impressed because even at the height of his strength, he never managed to fully tame the behemoth, while the boy did it in seconds. The prodigy then summons a miniature of the beast and explains that he can get stronger by making these small beings battle each other. Indra doesn't understand what he's talking about, so the boy decides to give a demonstration and summons Leviathan, Leveza, and Luthier along with the new ring. Suddenly, something strange begins to happen. It had been decades since these 4 magic items were gathered in the same place at the same time, and now that they are all present, something very special is about to be revealed. Because of that extremely rare encounter, our protagonist was taken to a completely different dimensional plane, as if he were experiencing a lucid dream. Inside that realm, the magical creatures explained that the last child who managed to awaken all 4 of them at once reached level 255 and was someone truly exceptional. That ancient genius placed the 4 under his command and restored their powers. According to Leviathan, the day when the quartet's full strength will be completely regenerated is drawing closer and closer. When he woke from what seemed like an auditory hallucination, the little master heard the people around him interpreting the event as if they had heard the voice of God himself. This only raised the expectations and the mystery surrounding the 13th prince. Indra also heard everything and believed it was a noble reason to celebrate. Acting with the generosity of a true leader, Noah requested that every citizen present receive 10 leans as a gift, a move that sent the crowd into a frenzy of absolute devotion, treating the boy as if he were a saint. In that society, it was the duty of the nobility to demonstrate gratitude by sharing wealth. In the Mills Empire, third-class nobles hated this tradition, and second-class ones only pretended to like it. But only first-class nobles, like Noah, were capable of doing it naturally. In the midst of this charity, the foreign warrior knelt before the boy and expressed her desire to strive with all her might to become his knight. But to everyone's surprise, the little master refused her request. He argued that receiving help and then becoming lazy was out of the question. Noah explained that an elite knight shouldn't be ashamed of being helped, but they must repay 10 times more to their master. If she wanted to be a servant worthy of him, she would have to act that way. The woman understood the message and agreed to strive in that direction. As she left, the veteran Indra commented that the young noble had just planted a very interesting seed. At that exact moment, Emperor Ararat himself appeared in the square and left everyone speechless. Having heard the end of the conversation, the sovereign commented that his son was indeed incredible, and that was why he had considered marrying the boy to his uncle's granddaughter. While everyone bowed, Noah quickly rose to summon Luthia as protection for his majesty, and used Leviathan's power to scan the area to identify whether there was any threat. Indra could hardly believe how rational this boy is at such a young age, and already considered him the best among the imperial princes. The emperor responded that it was for this reason he gave the young man the title of Sage, as worthy as Indra's own title of Thunder. The veteran laughed and said that soon he would be nothing more than an old and worn-out Thunder, but Ararat added that Noah is only beginning his journey, and in great style, since it has been decided that he will fight alone in his first real battle. Upon hearing this, the people began to admire the 13th prince even more, as it is common for nobles of his status to be escorted by powerful knights rather than being alone. But when it comes to Noah, it actually makes sense. Noticing that everyone's eyes were on him, the boy decided that this was the perfect opportunity to escort his majesty, understanding his father's true plan and accepting the favor. The emperor mentioned to his uncle that this was precisely what impressed him most about his son. Noah realized that whole conversation only served to create the opportunity for the boy to escort the sovereign. Indra confessed that he hadn't understood any of that, and Ararat joked that he expected nothing different from a noble who overflows with boldness but lacks subtlety and thought, which is also why he is constantly arguing with his wife over small matters. Leaving the jokes aside, the emperor said he had a serious matter to discuss. The two boarded the carriage while Noah and Luthia provided the escort from the outside. Suddenly, Luthia released her firepower and left the population in shock, while the boy and his father exchanged a nod as if it had all been planned. Inside the vehicle, the sovereign confessed to his uncle that he intends to depose the crown prince, Albert. For a long time, he believed Albert was the right choice, but the events involving the first prince, Gilbert, showed that he was mistaken. Listening closely through the window, Noah remembered that at that moment he only wanted to prevent the emperor from killing his own son, trying to convince him to give Gilbert life imprisonment instead. However, Albert's involvement in all this filth was something His Majesty could no longer accept. Indra admitted that the revelation left him speechless and believes that if Albert becomes emperor, innocent heads will certainly roll during the process. The sovereign agreed and emphasized that Henry, Oscar, and Noah would likely be the first victims, and he could never allow such a bloodbath before the throne. Indra asked who would replace Albert, but Ararat said he did not yet know. The uncle even pulled the emperor's ear, saying he is already old, and that if he dies before deciding, the empire will enter a state of collapse. Noah realized that his father sought the Thunder's advice because only he has the courage to be so frank with the leader of Mills. In fact, Ararat corrected his uncle and said he already knows who to name as his heir, but if he announced it publicly now, the news would cause general discord. Noah intervened and advised his father to make public only a testament declaring the successor. Indra thought it was risky, as the document could be forged, but the little master suggested hiding the testament inside His Majesty's own body, such as an engraved dental implant or some kind of magic. The two loved the idea. Upon arriving at the throne room, the emperor ordered everyone to leave except for a eunuch who, according to the official crews, was unable to hear, speak, or read, making him ideal for moments of absolute secrecy. The sovereign decided to follow his son's suggestion, but Noah raised one more point. Command of all armed forces must be returned to the emperor, both Henry's command as Minister of War and Noah's own command as Commander-in-Chief of the First Guard. Indra fully agreed, for if someone dissatisfied remained in command, they could seize the throne by force. What impressed the veteran most, however, was that the young noble gave up his own men to reinforce his loyalty to the crown. Ararat then handed Noah the imperial decree removing the boy from his position, as suggested. Next, the emperor handed another decree to the official who supposedly couldn't hear a thing. Noah believed it was for Henry. The ruler made a few hand gestures, which were the instructions passed to the servant. While Indra questioned how his nephew intended to depose the heir, Noah, citing his title as Minister of Justice, emphasized that His Majesty has total freedom to choose how to appoint or depose a successor, and no one may interfere. However, unlike Gilbert, Albert did nothing technically wrong to be executed. The boy suggested keeping him only as an imperial prince, without the right to the throne, but without removing him from the family. Noah even suggested a name for this process: Imperial Prince of the End. The emperor liked the idea and began writing the decree, but Indra pulled his ear again, saying the text was confusing and difficult to understand. The sovereign explained that it is difficult to write an order that takes away the inheritance of one's own children, even if it is to protect them. Noah advised leaving the text exactly as it was, because the father's emotions would remain exposed to Albert, which could be a reward if he were willing to work hard as a simple prince. The emperor lamented once more that Noah wasn't born first. He stamped the document and handed it to the servant, but the moment the eunuch turned to leave, the little master stopped him on the spot. He noticed the subject reacted when looking at the document and hesitated, a clear sign that he knew how to read. The eunuch tried to flee but was brought down by the boy's power. Furious, the emperor summoned crews and discovered the servant lied about being illiterate. Noah, as Minister of Justice, decreed the immediate execution of the traitor, as he positioned himself as a dangerous piece in imperial conspiracies. Crews received a salary reduction punishment for 6 months for the failure in supervision. At night, the prime minister commented to the emperor that Noah is so impressive, he seems capable of reading minds. The sovereign lamented that Albert isn't reliable and asked if the minister knew the name Leviathan. The man explained it was one of the entities that helped the emperor of the Silver Age. Noah's father believes this magical force is now with his son, and the minister imagines the boy might even surpass that legendary era. The next day, Noah set out in his carriage on a complicated journey. His knight, Shirley Grants, asked about the destination, and the little master confessed he was going to Albert's mansion. Meanwhile, the singer Elise missed her favorite spectator at her performance. Noah arrived at his brother's gate and requested an audience very formally. Albert found the posture amusing and asked they treat each other just as brothers. The little master asked to see the garden, and Albert ended up giving him a pair of extremely expensive trees as a gift, commenting that Noah has a sharp eye for beauty. The deposed heir recalled he had already given Leviathan to the boy, and that power must be in worthy hands. Noah mentioned that summer is coming, and the emperor will travel north, but this time he will take Albert along, which left the older brother troubled. Normally, Albert stayed in charge of the government while the father traveled, but now he would be taken to be closely watched. The genius reflected that while his father wants to watch him, he still hopes the sovereign can pass some positive sentiment to the brother. Later, at Noah's mansion, the informant Olivia Coyle appeared with news that would change everything. Albert is going to attempt a coup d'etat that very night. And that's where the episode ends, and I confess I was completely blown away by Noah's insight in unmasking that spy who pretended to be deaf. The kid doesn't miss a thing. The atmosphere for Albert's coup is extremely heavy, and I can't wait to see how our wise prince handles this family betrayal. You liked it and want a continuation? Then leave it in the comments that you want the next part. Smash the like and hype button to strengthen this video, and subscribe and turn on the bell so you don't miss any updates.